Gracias.
Thank you very much. Ahora quisiera invitar al señor Ademar Ramírez de la Dirección de Inversión Pública de Perú. Good morning. The topic that I am going to present this morning has to do with risk management within climate change context and how it is assimilated in public investment within the vision of the Ministry of Economy and Finance of Peru. And specifically, I want to explain public investment on risk reduction of climate change, and this is carried out by the General Directorate of Public Investment of the Ministry of Economy and Finance of Peru. Very well. The presentation will include the issue of sustainable development and the timeline regarding risk management within a climate change context, and all of these aspects that we take into consideration to include risk management in public investment, everything that has to do with the instruments to manage risk within the national policy and management of climate change risk in public investment projects, as well as the new challenges that we face, adaptation to climate change, and a series of publications. Within the first part, what has to do with sustainable development and risk management and climate change adaptation, we understand this as the Peruvian experience from a perspective of planning for development, which is a meso vision. From the perspective of this development of risk management with a macro and micro vision and the usefulness of that risk management. In planning for development, we all know that we have to carry out diagnosis to then proceed with the planning processes, developing plans or regulation plans, after which we carry out the processes of participatory budgets, which is something very characteristic for the country, to then proceed to a process of selecting projects. But this is all based, as I mentioned, on actions that take place at the macro and micro level, and that entail, for example, in diagnosis, the risk analysis at macro level, to then move on to planning processes in the programs and projects that have to do with risk reduction. And when we work the issue of participatory budgets, we manage criteria to fundamentally reduce the vulnerability. And when projects are being put together, specifically a risk analysis at the micro level is included. Now, regarding usefulness, all of these steps that are followed in sequence are very useful to be used in the regional levels, sectorial levels, and national level, locally and regionally, and so on. Regarding the timeline, in what have to do with the processes that manage risk within a climate change context, how has the Ministry of Economy and Finances been managing this issue? We can observe that this work is not recent. This work started, if I'm not mistaken, in 2006 and 2007, as it can be observed, and where we started working on this issue fundamentally to lay the groundwork of defining concepts, of defining the theory, the concepts. so that we can then begin strengthening this process through generation information available through danger maps or hazard maps. In that time frame, in 2010, steps were taken to generate an assessment of the profitability, which is a methodological tool, social profitability of the measures for disaster risk reduction in public investment processes, as well as identifying, formulating risk. All of these are methodological tools that were laying the groundwork to what has to do with risk management and public investment in the context of climate change. And in November of 2011, as we can see here, work was done through public investment to adapt to climate change. And this is an agreement between the Ministry of the Environment and the Ministry of Economy and Finance of Peru. In 2012, guidelines were worked in, and in 2013, the minimum contents to be included within climate change risk reduction until we get to 2014. And at the time, within the National System of Public Investment, we have ready for publication the general guidelines of public investment and risk management within the context of climate change. As the third part, we have the processes to integrate risk management for climate change in public investment. The fundamental foundation for this, from the Peruvian experience, has 8 processes. But these 8 processes have 3 processes that you can view in the central area. These are the 3 fundamental processes for us. Number 1, we have the concepts, as I mentioned in that timeline, when we worked the theory behind the work that we were going to do. We defined costs, we did the cost-to-benefit analysis, and then we developed case studies. These are fundamental processes to reach the objective, which is integration of risk management within the context of climate change in public investment. But those 3 processes are grounded on these supporting processes, which are basically the input points, like, for example, priority setting of sectors. So we had to define fundamentally, for the Peruvian case, areas that we call regions or departments, El Cusco, which many of you may know, the Piura region, and that was selected based on a multi-criteria analysis. Also, the foundations are based on the mechanisms of funding and information systems. Likewise, we were aiming to strengthen this through networks and alliances within the institutional framework that we have with the regional governments and a series of institutions, as well as knowledge management that takes place through training, capacity building, methodological tools that have been defined through the National System of Public Investment in Peru. As part number 4, in what has to do with instruments for disaster risk reduction within the national policy, we can observe that we have incentives through mechanisms of funding. We have a budgetary program 068. We have FONIPREL, which is a fund where one bids to obtain the funds, and when we focus fully on risk reduction. And we have the municipal incentive programs. All of them aim to include in annual budgets risk reduction to be developed also through inclusion in public investment projects and reduce the vulnerability of the population and of their livelihoods when faced with a disaster. Number 5, we have the issue of risk management within the context of climate change in projects of public investment. This from the perspective of the prospective and corrective management measures. In the prospective actions fundamentally strengthened through corrective and prospective actions. In prospective actions take place through regulatory norms, the analysis of the prospective risk of public investment projects, and measures to reduce disaster risks, and adaptation to climate change of the GDP. And then in corrective management, we carry out risk analysis of production units, measures to adapt to risk, to reduce risk and climate change adaptation, such as relocation, increase of resistance, resilience, reduction of threats. And when we talk about reactive management, we're basically minimizing damage or the loss of recovery of services. As a resilience, capacities and warning systems, preparedness for response, ensuring emergencies. Peru has a fund of 50 million dollars for these reactive actions. Under item 6, new challenges. Within new challenges, we include managing disaster risks within the context of climate change and projects of public investment. And those new challenges, what we have been working on is the fact that service, for example, is interrupted because it wasn't sustainable. That was the fundamental reason why we worked on the disaster risk reduction within the context of climate change in public investment projects, so as not to generate additional expenses in reconstruction, rehabilitation, as well as costs to the users, because they did not have the service available. We will be increasing the cost and reducing the benefits, and this is going to affect the social profitability expected. This is what has to do with avoided costs and the cost of benefit analysis. And dangers or hazards can be exacerbated and will affect other social units or the environment, increasing social costs, reducing social profitability. This was fundamentally the reason why we started working on disaster risk management within the context of climate change. And finally, as it has been mentioned, all of this work of risk management within the context of climate change and public investment, in the case of the Peruvian experience, is also included in all of the methodological tools that have been applied in that timeline that I showed you. How, since 2006, we have been establishing, through coordinated work with regional governments, local governments, and a series of institutions, a lot of technical tools, which today I am leaving also here on the table so that you can take these publications. All of these documents are available as well, including this last document, which soon will be published, which is the latest guidelines, general guidelines, considering risk within the context of climate change. This document, as I had mentioned, includes all the scenario of risk management and climate change. I also would like to say that within all of these risk reduction issues and actions that we have been working in Peru, we are carrying out an international workshop called Experiences in Processes to Recover Services Post-Disaster in Peru on July 3rd and 4th, within all of this disaster risk management in public investment issues. You are all invited. Thank you very much.